3 days after their son Tommy vanished into the forest without a trace, a fox began appearing at Sarah's and Michael's window. It pawed at the glass as if trying to communicate by knocking. Driven by the desperate need to find their son, they decided to follow it, leading to a discovery beyond their wildest imagination. Will their discovery lead them to Tommy? Welcome to Wonderbot Animals. 3 days had passed since Michael and Sarah's son Tommy disappeared. The police had no leads, and the small town of Redwood Falls was under a pall of silence and suspicion. Each night, as their despair grew, a fox with strikingly intense eyes appeared at their living room window, tapping the glass softly with a paw, as if trying to deliver a message. On the fourth night, Michael watched from the sofa, his eyes locked on the fox's movements. It was peculiar that this animal behaved with such purpose. "Maybe it's a sign," Sarah whispered next to him, her voice shaky with mingled hope and fear. Together, they decided, if the fox returned tomorrow, they would follow it. The next evening, as the sky painted with sunset hues, the fox appeared again, its knocks more urgent. Without hesitation, Michael and Sarah grabbed their coats and a flashlight. They stepped into the cool evening, their hearts pounding with a cocktail of fear and anticipation. The fox waited, its tail flicking impatiently. It led them through familiar streets, then veered into the woods that bordered their town. The underbrush was thick and thorns tugged at their clothes. They could barely keep up with the fox's brisk pace. "Where is it taking us?" Sarah panted, her doubts growing with every step into the darkening forest. The woods opened to a clearing they had never seen before, even though they'd lived in Redwood Falls all their lives. In the center, a dilapidated cabin overrun with vines stood eerily silent. The fox stopped, staring at the cabin before vanishing into the thick woods. "Could Tommy be there?" Michael's voice was hopeful, yet laced with fear. Approaching the cabin, the old wood creaked under their weight. Inside, it was dust and shadows, but on a dusty table lay a child's red cap, undeniably Tommy's. Sarah's knees nearly buckled at the sight. "He was here," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. The cap was a promise, a clue that he was still out there. They searched the cabin, but found little else. As they prepared to leave, Michael noticed a photograph pinned against the wall. It showed a group of people, among them a man who bore a surprisingly striking resemblance to Sarah. "Who are these people?" he wondered aloud as Sarah made her way to his side to study the picture. "I have no idea," she whispered, eyes locked on the unknown man who looked so much like her. Leaving the cabin, they marked the spot on their GPS and decided to return with the police in the morning. That night, both of them lay awake, the image of the photograph and Tommy's red cap haunting them. Who was that man in the picture? And what was that place? Thoughts swirled chaotically, each more unsettling than the last. Neither Sarah nor Michael slept much. Morning brought no relief. The police combed the cabin and the surrounding area, but came up empty. No new clues or leads surfaced, and both the photograph and the man remained a mystery. "We need to understand this place," Sarah said determinedly when Michael looked at her in despair. "Let's talk to the older townspeople. Someone has to know something about this cabin." Their first stop was Mr. Abernathy, the town historian, who lived in a cluttered house filled with books and papers. He listened intently, his eyes narrowing when he saw the photograph. "Ah, that cabin," he murmured, thumbing through an old ledger. "It's been abandoned for decades, but it used to be." His voice trailed off, eyes going vacant as if he was remembering an untold pain. Sarah and Michael gave Mr. Abernathy a moment to collect his thoughts before pressing him further. "What can you tell us about the cabin?" Michael prompted, his voice tinged with urgency. Mr. Abernathy, clearing his throat, pointed to a faded map on the wall. "Let me show you exactly where it stands," he said, unrolling the map across his cluttered desk. They inquired about the cabin's origins and ownership, showing intense curiosity about its history. "This land was first claimed by one of our earliest settlers," Mr. Abernathy explained, tracing a line with his finger on the map. "The cabin was built as a frontier outpost," he continued, his eyes reflecting a flicker of nostalgia as he spoke of the rugged early days of Redwood Falls. Mr. Abernathy shared that the cabin was once owned by a pioneering family foundational to Redwood Falls. "The Harrisons," he said, the name resonating with a weight of history. "They were instrumental in setting up the initial structures of our community." He paused, looking from Sarah to Michael, seeing their anticipation for more. He detailed the family's significant influence in the town's early development and community structure. "The Harrisons established the first mill and trading post here," he noted, pointing to a spot on the map. "Their efforts helped shape the town's future, attracting other families to settle here," he added, pulling out an old photograph showing a bustling town square. The historian's connection seemed personal as he mentioned the cabin's deep roots in local law. "My father used to speak of the Harrisons with great respect," he mused, his voice softening. "They were considered guardians of this town's spirit." As he spoke, Sarah and Michael sensed more to the story, perhaps linked to the mysterious photograph they'd found. Mr. Abernathy revealed that his son had married into this influential founding family. "Yes, my son's wife, Emily, is a Harrison," he said, pulling out a wedding photo from a dusty album. Sarah and Michael leaned closer, examining the faces in the photograph, their minds racing with the implications of this new connection. He recounted how a patriarch of the family had mysteriously disappeared in the woods, never to return. "Old man Harrison went hunting one day and just vanished," Mr. Abernathy explained, his eyes clouded with the memory. He shuffled some papers and produced a newspaper clipping from the time, its edges yellowed and brittle. They learned about the lasting impact of the disappearance on the family and the town's history. "It sent ripples through Redwood Falls," Mr. Abernathy sighed. His disappearance marked the beginning of a tough period for the Harrisons and the community. He tapped the article, pointing to a photo of a solemn crowd gathered in the town square. Spurred by Mr. Abernathy's eerie tale, Sarah and Michael asked more about the founding family. "Were there other unusual stories about the Harrisons?" Michael inquired. Mr. Abernathy nodded, reaching for another book filled with town records, his fingers flipping through the pages to a section marked with a bookmark. They probed for any connections between the family and the man resembling Sarah in the photo. "This man, could he have been a Harrison?" Sarah asked, pointing to the stranger in the photograph. Mr. Abernathy peered closely, his expression thoughtful. "It's possible," he murmured. "There were many distant relatives we lost track of over the years." Their questions were aimed to uncover any historical events that could relate to their son's disappearance. "Were there similar cases? Anything at all that could help us?" Sarah pressed, her eyes scanning Mr. Abernathy's cluttered surroundings for clues. The old man rubbed his chin, thinking back through decades of town stories and gossip. Mr. Abernathy hesitated, claiming his memories were fragmented as he struggled to provide clear answers. "It's been many years, and there are so many tales I've heard," he admitted, shuffling through a stack of old photographs and notes, his hands trembling slightly. "Maybe, just maybe, the town archives have something more concrete," he suggested with a weary sigh. He suggested that Sarah and Michael visit the town archives for more comprehensive information. "You'll find all the public records there, newspapers, land deeds, family registers," he explained, pointing them towards the large building at the end of Main Street. Sarah nodded, jotting down the details in her notebook, determined to leave no stone unturned. The couple felt he was withholding information, but decided to follow his guidance to the archives. As they left, Michael whispered, "He knows more than he's saying, Sarah." She agreed, but also felt that the archives might hold the key. They walked towards Main Street, the chill of the evening creeping into their bones, but sharpened by a resolve to find the truth. Their quest for truth steered them away from anecdotes to tangible archival evidence. Let's start with the newspapers from the year Dad disappeared, Michael suggested as they entered the dimly lit archive room. Sarah nodded, pulling a large ledger from the shelf. The musty smell of old paper filled the air as they began their meticulous search. With resolve, Sarah and Michael arrived at the town archives, determined to uncover anything useful. The building was old, its wooden floors creaking under their steps. They approached the main desk, their determination palpable in the quiet, dusty room filled with the past. They requested access to all documents related to the founding family from the archival clerk. "We need everything on the Harrisons," Michael stated firmly. The clerk nodded, her fingers tapping on the computer as she looked up the relevant files. "This might take some time," she warned, her voice echoing slightly in the large, silent room. The couple prepared themselves for a detailed exploration through historical data and records. They set up at a large table, spreading out notebooks and pens. Sarah pulled her hair back, ready to dive into the mountains of paperwork they anticipated. "Ready for this?" she asked Michael, who nodded, his eyes fixed on the clerk returning with a trolley loaded with files. As the clerk fetched voluminous files, anticipation grew about what they might reveal. Sarah and Michael watched as she piled box after box onto their table. "Here are the deed transfers, newspaper clippings, personal letters and more," the clerk said, gesturing to the stacks. They exchanged a glance, their excitement tinged with the anxiety of what they might find. They knew that any clue found could be pivotal in understanding their son's disappearance. "Anything could be the key," Michael murmured as they began to sift through the first box. Papers rustled, and the faint smell of old ink filled the air around them. They were ready to uncover whatever secrets lay buried in the dusty archives. The clerk returned with stacks of files, which Sarah and Michael began to meticulously examine. They spread the papers across the large table, each piece potentially hiding details of their son's whereabouts. "Let's organize these by date and type," Michael suggested, reaching for the first stack of musty bound records. They requested specific documents that might connect the founding family to the mysterious cabin. "We need any land records, wills, or personal letters that mention that area," Sarah instructed the clerk, who nodded and went back to the storerooms. The couple waited anxiously, hoping these documents would shed light on the cabin's history. As they sifted through records, the couple noted any discrepancies or anomalies in family histories. "Look at this," Sarah pointed out. "The dates on these transactions don't line up." They made notes of any inconsistencies that could indicate hidden stories or overlooked details relevant to their search. They paid special attention to any mention of disappearances or unusual incidents involving the family. "This journal entry mentions a sudden departure," Michael read aloud, scanning an old diary. "No reason given, just left town overnight." They highlighted this and other similar entries, piecing together a pattern that might lead to clues. The detailed archival work was slow but necessary, as each file could hold a crucial piece of the puzzle. "We can't rush this," Michael reminded Sarah as she flipped through another ledger. They were patient, knowing that the thorough examination of these documents was essential to understanding what might have happened to their son. In a quiet archive corner, they started with the founding family's extensive tree. Large, intricate charts spread across the table, tracing generations of Harrisons. Michael pointed to the various branches, noting significant dates and marriages, while Sarah cross-referenced them with other documents they had gathered. They identified the man from the cabin photo in an old family tree chart. "That's him," Sarah said, pointing at a faded photograph pasted next to a name. The man's features were unmistakable now that they saw him in the context of the Harrison family lineage. His connection to the cabin seemed more and more plausible. Sarah exclaimed in recognition, which drew Michael's attention to another intriguing document. "Michael, look at this," she called out, holding up a brittle letter dated several decades ago. It mentioned the cabin and a gathering, hinting at a secret meeting. Michael hurried over, his interest piqued by her discovery. Michael reviewed a different file, finding a potential link to Sarah's ancestors. "This land grant application has your great-grandfather's signature," he said, showing her a document. The name matched, and it was dated around the same time as the earliest Harrison records. This could mean that Sarah's family and the Harrisons were more closely connected than they thought. This discovery suggested an unexpected familial connection to the founding family. "Could it be that our families were intertwined back then?" Sarah wondered aloud. Michael nodded, his mind racing with the implications. If Sarah's ancestors were linked to the Harrisons, that might explain the man's resemblance to her in the cabin photo. Michael shared the other file with Sarah, revealing her own family tree intertwined with the founding family. The documents laid out a network of marriages and business ties between their ancestors and the Harrisons, clearly documenting a shared history that neither had known before. "This changes everything," Sarah murmured, tracing her finger over the names and dates. This linkage implied a deeper historical connection between Sarah's lineage and the town's pioneers. They looked at each other in amazement. "Our families helped build this town together," Michael said, his voice filled with awe. The pieces of their families' pasts were aligning in ways that made the present mystery even more enthralling and perplexing. The couple pondered the implications of their families' entwined pasts. Could this connection be why Tommy? Sarah's voice trailed off, the question hanging in the air. They scanned more documents, looking for any detail that might explain the current mystery through the lens of their shared history. Each discovery seemed to add another layer to their understanding. They realized that understanding these connections could be key to solving the mystery of Tommy's disappearance. "Maybe there's something about these lands, or an old family feud," Michael speculated as they went through old maps and legal disputes documented years ago. They knew they were on the brink of uncovering something significant. Armed with new knowledge, they decided to revisit the cabin as a potential source of further clues. "We have to go back there now with all this," Sarah insisted, packing the documents into her bag. "There might be something we missed, something that only makes sense now." Michael nodded, his determination renewed by the day's revelations. Determined, they gathered their findings and set out for the cabin once more. Maps, old photographs and documents were packed into their backpacks. With each step towards the forest, their resolve hardened. "We might find the answers today," Michael said, looking over at Sarah, who nodded back with a mixture of hope and anxiety. They planned to explore deeper into the forest, hoping to find more than before. "Last time, we barely scratched the surface," Sarah remarked as they reviewed the map. They marked potential areas of interest with pins, areas that could have been significant to their ancestors and possibly to Tommy's disappearance. As they approached the cabin, memories of their first visit mixed with renewed determination. The path, once unfamiliar and foreboding, now seemed like an old challenge returning. "Remember how lost we felt?" Michael asked. "This time, we're ready," Sarah replied, her voice steady and more confident as they neared the old structure. They used their newly acquired historical insights to guide their search. "The Harrisons might have used this area differently," Michael speculated, examining the ground for signs. Sarah cross-referenced a diary entry with their current location, looking for landmarks mentioned by their ancestors that might point them to something overlooked. The forest seemed even more ominous as they ventured beyond familiar paths in search of answers. Shadows grew longer as the day wore on, and every snap of a twig underfoot echoed ominously. "We're not just following a map, we're following a history," Sarah whispered, pushing aside a branch as they made their way deeper into the heart of the woods. Armed with the photograph, they revisited the cabin as nightfall approached. The shadows of the trees grew longer, casting eerie patterns on the ground. Sarah clutched the photo, comparing it against the fading light, trying to spot the exact angles and landmarks it captured, hoping it would guide them correctly this time. The forest grew darker around them, and they realized they had become lost. The path they followed seemed to twist and turn back upon itself, and landmarks looked unfamiliar in the dim light. "Are you sure this was the right way?" Sarah asked, a note of panic in her voice as she shined her flashlight deeper into the thicket. Sarah expressed her fear, but was suddenly interrupted by a familiar animal sound. It was the soft, sharp tapping of a fox, a sound they hadn't heard since their last venture here. They stopped in their tracks, listening intently. The rhythmic tapping seemed deliberate, as if calling them to attention. The fox from earlier reappeared, signaling them to follow it deeper into the woods. Its bright eyes pierced through the dimness as it looked back at them periodically, ensuring they were still following. With no better plan and the path unclear, Michael nodded to Sarah, and they decided to trust the creature that had once led them to clues. They hesitated, but the urgency of their situation drove them to trust the fox's guidance. As they pushed through dense underbrush, following the fox's swift movements, their doubts lingered, yet the need for answers about their son's disappearance propelled them forward. "Let's keep going," Michael urged, his voice low, as they delved further into the unknown depths of the forest. Following the fox led them to a new clearing after hours of tense navigation. The dense foliage suddenly opened up to reveal a moonlit glade. They paused at the edge, catching their breath, their eyes scanning the open space for any sign of Tommy or further clues to his whereabouts. A stern man confronted them, aiming a weapon and demanding they stop advancing. "Who are you, and what are you doing here?" he barked, his posture tense. Sarah and Michael froze, their hearts pounding. The unexpected threat threw them, but they knew they needed to handle this carefully if they were to proceed. Sarah pleaded with the man, showing him the photo and Tommy's cap as proof of their desperate search. "Please, we're just looking for our son. He's missing, and we think he might have come this way," she explained hurriedly, her voice quivering with emotion. The man's eyes flicked to the photo, then to the cap, his expression unreadable. She explained their plight, hoping to gain the man's trust and assistance. "We've been following clues, and they led us here," Michael added, his voice steady despite the fear. "We believe there's a connection to this place, to the cabin, and maybe even to you." They waited, watching the man's reaction closely, hoping he would lower his weapon and talk. The man's reaction was critical. Their entire quest hinged on his response. He studied their faces for a moment, his gaze intense and probing. Then, slowly, he lowered the gun, the tension easing slightly. "I need to understand why you're here," he said gruffly, signaling them to follow him towards a path leading further into the woods. The man revealed himself as a descendant of the founding family's lost patriarch. "My ancestors settled these lands," he began, his voice resonating with a pride that echoed the surroundings. "And like them, I chose to stay away from the chaos of modern life." Sarah and Michael listened intently, understanding dawning on them as he gestured around at the peaceful seclusion of the woods. He explained their choice to live isolated from modern society, seeking a simpler life. "We live by the old ways, connected to the land," he continued, leading them through the dense trees to a hidden part of the forest. "This simplicity, it's a freedom not many will understand," he said, his eyes scanning the natural beauty that sprawled around them. The community he led had found Tommy wandering in the woods and had taken him in. "He was lost and alone, but he's safe now," the man assured them as he guided them towards a small, warmly lit cabin where laughter and voices could be heard. Sarah's heart leapt with hope as they neared, the possibility of reunion becoming real. Sarah and Michael were overwhelmed with relief and gratitude as they were reunited with Tommy. The boy ran into their arms, his face alight with joy and surprise. Tears and laughter mingled as they held him close, the weight of their fears melting away. "I knew you'd come," Tommy said, his voice muffled against his mother's shoulder. The family's reunion marked a new beginning, intertwined with the history of Redwood Falls and its founding myths. As they walked back through the woods, the cabin fading behind them, Michael said, "Our family's story is here, isn't it? Part of this town's lore." They nodded to each other, their journey not just ending, but evolving into a new chapter of their lives together.